On the morning of November 9th, 1971, a man sat down at his kitchen table, ate breakfast with his family, and then, one by one, executed every single person in the house. His wife, his mother, his 3 children. Then he mopped up the blood, turned on the radio, set the thermostat to 50 degrees and drove away. He wouldn't be found for 18 years. And when they finally caught him, he was living in a nice house with a new wife, going to church every Sunday, like nothing ever happened. This is the story of John List, and what he did in that mansion is one of the most calculated, cold-blooded acts in American crime history. From the outside, John Emil List was everything a community could want. He was a certified public accountant, a veteran, a devoted Lutheran who taught Sunday school every single week without fail. He wore a suit and tie even on casual days. He spoke softly. He never raised his voice. Neighbors in Westfield, New Jersey, described him as polite, reserved, and deeply religious. He lived with his family in a 19-room Victorian mansion called Breeze Knoll. It sat on a hill surrounded by old trees with stained glass windows imported from a European chapel. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, the kind of house people slowed down to admire when driving past. Inside that house lived 5 other people. His wife, Helen, age 46. She had once been vibrant and outgoing, but years of illness, the result of late-stage cerebral syphilis she'd contracted from her first husband, had left her increasingly withdrawn. She drank heavily. She rarely left the house. His mother, Alma, age 84. She was frail and devout, living in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of the mansion. She spent most of her days reading scripture and looking out the window. And his 3 children. Patricia, 16, John Jr., 15, and Frederick, 13. To the outside world, this was a respectable family, a pillar of their church, a fixture of the community. But behind those stained glass windows, John List's world was collapsing, and he had been planning what to do about it for a very, very long time. Here's what no one in Westfield knew. John List had been fired from his job months earlier. Not just any job, his executive-level position at a bank in Jersey City. He'd been let go, and rather than tell his family, rather than tell anyone, he continued the charade. Every single morning, he put on his suit, picked up his briefcase, kissed his wife goodbye, and drove away. But he didn't go to an office. He went to the train station. He sat there. He read the newspaper. He watched the hours crawl by. And then, in the late afternoon, he drove home, walked through the door, and acted as if he'd had a normal day at work. He did this for months. The bills were piling up. The mortgage was overdue. The utilities were about to be shut off. He'd already drained his mother's entire savings, nearly $200,000, to keep the household afloat. He'd cashed in his children's life insurance policies. There was nothing left. The house, that gorgeous 19-room mansion, was a money pit. It cost a fortune to heat. The roof leaked. The taxes alone were crushing, and John List, A man who defined himself entirely by control and appearance could feel that control slipping away. But it wasn't just the money. His daughter Patricia had started dabbling in witchcraft, or at least that's how Liszt saw it. She was interested in theatre, in the counterculture of the early 70s. She had a boyfriend he didn't approve of. His son, John Jr., was pulling away too. There were whispers of behavioral problems. The children were drifting from the church. For a man like John Liszt, whose entire identity was built on rigid religious devotion and the appearance of moral perfection, this was more than a crisis. It was an abomination. And in his twisted, meticulous mind, a solution began to take shape. John Liszt woke up early that morning. It was a Tuesday, grey and cold, a typical New Jersey autumn day. He made breakfast. He watched his children leave for school, Patricia and Frederick heading off as usual. John Jr., the 15-year-old, had a soccer game later that day. Then Liszt waited for the house to empty out. His wife, Helen, was in the kitchen. He walked up behind her, raised a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, and shot her in the side of the head. She collapsed onto the floor. He stood over her for a moment, then he went upstairs to the 3rd floor, to his mother's small apartment. Alma Liszt was likely sitting in her chair, maybe reading, maybe praying. He shot her above the left eye. She died instantly. Then he went back downstairs. He dragged his wife's body into the ballroom. Yes, the mansion had a ballroom, and laid her out on a sleeping bag on the floor. Then he went back upstairs, wrapped his mother's body in a sheet, and left her in the 3rd floor apartment. She was too heavy to carry all the way down. Then he cleaned up the blood. Then he sat down and waited for his children to come home. Patricia arrived first. She walked through the door, probably calling out for her mom, probably dropping her backpack the way teenagers do. Her father shot her from behind. She fell. She was still alive. He stood over his 16-year-old daughter and shot her again. Then he dragged her body into the ballroom and laid her next to her mother. Frederick came home next. The same thing, a shot, then another, dragged to the ballroom. John Jr. was last. He had his soccer game that afternoon, and Liszt actually drove to the school to watch his son play. He sat in the stands. He watched the boy run up and down the field. Then he drove home, and when John Jr. walked through the door that evening, he shot him. Multiple times, 10 times in fact. John Jr. fought back. He tried to run. His father chased him and kept firing. Of all 5 victims, it was his eldest son who received the most violence. Later, Liszt would say this bothered him. He dragged John Jr. into the ballroom and laid him beside his mother, sister, and brother. 4 bodies in a row, on sleeping bags, in a ballroom, beneath stained glass windows. Then John Liszt did something that still haunts investigators to this day. He knelt down beside each body and he prayed. What Liszt did next reveals just how calculating he truly was. He didn't panic. He didn't run. Not yet. He walked through the house methodically, like he was closing out an account. He turned on the intercom system and tuned it to a radio station playing hymns. Religious music echoed through every room of the mansion. He turned down the thermostat, not off, just low enough to slow decomposition without freezing the pipes. He turned on every light in the house so it would appear from the outside that the family was home. He cut his own face out of every single family photograph in the house. Everyone. Wedding photos, school portraits, holiday snapshots. Wherever his face appeared, gone. Carefully, precisely removed. Then he sat down at his desk and wrote a letter. Not to the police, not to a lawyer, to his pastor. The letter was 5 pages long, single-spaced, and in it, John List explained exactly why he had murdered his family. He said he had done it to save their souls. He said the world was corrupting them, his wife's drinking, his daughter's interest in the occult, his son's rebelliousness. He said he feared that if they continued down this path, they would lose their chance at heaven. So he sent them there himself. He wrote that he hoped God would forgive him, but that he could not kill himself because suicide was an unforgivable sin. Murder, apparently, could be forgiven. He signed the letter, sealed it, and mailed it. Then he drove to John F. Kennedy International Airport, parked his car in the long-term lot, and disappeared. Here's the most disturbing part. Nobody noticed. For almost a month, no one checked on the List family. List had thought of everything. He'd written letters to the school, telling teachers that the family was going to visit Helen's sick mother in North Carolina. He'd cancelled the milk and newspaper deliveries. He'd told neighbors a similar story. The lights stayed on. The music kept playing. The heat kept running, just barely. It wasn't until December 7th, nearly a month later, that Patricia's drama teacher, concerned that her best student hadn't returned and couldn't be reached, contacted the police. Officers arrived at Breeze Knoll that evening. They found the lights on. They heard the faint sound of hymns coming from inside. They forced open a door. The smell hit them first. In the ballroom, they found 4 bodies laid out in a neat row on sleeping bags. Helen, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. Each one had been placed with care, almost ceremonially. Upstairs on the 3rd floor, they found Alma in a storage closet, wrapped in sheets. The house was cold. The radio was still playing, and every photograph on the walls had a hole where John List's face should have been. John List was now the most wanted man in New Jersey, but he was already gone. And the trail was ice cold. Investigators found his car at JFK Airport, but there was no record of him boarding any flight. He had simply vanished. No credit card activity, no forwarding address, no contact with anyone from his former life. The case went cold. Years passed. A decade passed. Detectives retired. Files gathered dust. Breeze Knoll itself burned down in a mysterious fire in 1972, destroying whatever evidence might have remained. John List had become a ghost, but not everyone forgot. A retired FBI profiler named Robert Ressler, one of the men who coined the term serial killer, reviewed the case and built a psychological profile. He predicted that wherever List was hiding, he would be living a nearly identical life. Same rigid routine, same church-going habits, same quiet, controlled demeanor. He would remarry, Ressler predicted. He would find another woman to control, because men like John List don't change. They repeat. That profile sat in a file for years, until 1989, when a television show changed everything. The show was America's Most Wanted, hosted by John Walsh. It was only in its second season, but it had already helped capture dozens of fugitives. Producers found the List case and knew it was perfect for television. A mass murderer who had been missing for nearly 2 decades. But there was a problem. They had no idea what John List looked like now. The only photos they had were from 1971. He'd be in his mid-60s. He could look like anyone. So they brought in a man named Frank Bender. Bender was a forensic sculptor from Philadelphia. Self-taught, eccentric, brilliant. He'd helped law enforcement before, reconstructing faces from skulls to identify Jane and John Doe's. But this was different. This time he wasn't rebuilding a face from bone. He was predicting one. Bender studied every photograph of List that existed. He consulted with Ressler on the psychological profile. He studied how faces age, how skin loosens, how jowls form, how the cartilage in the nose and ears continues to grow. Then he made a creative decision that would prove extraordinary. He added glasses, thick, heavy-framed glasses. The kind a conservative, old-fashioned accountant would wear, and he added a receding hairline because List's father had been bald. When the bust was finished, it was eerily specific. Not a vague approximation, a face. A real, particular, identifiable face. On May 21, 1989, America's Most Wanted aired the List segment. They showed the bust, they told the story, millions of people watched, and within days the tips started pouring in. One caller stood out. A woman in Richmond, Virginia, was watching the show with her neighbors. When the bust appeared on screen, the room went quiet. They all saw it. The bust looked exactly like a man they knew, a quiet, polite accountant named Bob Clark. He went to church every Sunday. He wore thick glasses. He'd recently remarried a woman named Dolores who thought he was a widower. Bob Clark was John List. On June 1, 1989, FBI agents descended on a modest home in Midlothian, Virginia, a suburb of Richmond. When they knocked on the door, a tall, balding man in glasses answered. He was calm, measured, polite. They asked him his name. Robert Clark, he said. They arrested him. At first, he denied everything. He maintained the Bob Clark identity for days, but fingerprint analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. Robert Peter Clark was John Emil List, the man who had murdered his entire family 18 years earlier and walked away. And here's the thing that chilled investigators most. Robert Ressler's profile had been almost perfectly accurate. List had moved to Denver after the murders, joined a church, gotten an accounting job, and started a new life under a new name. He eventually moved to Virginia, married Dolores, joined another Lutheran church, and settled into a quiet, controlled, utterly unremarkable existence. He had rebuilt the same life, the exact same life, down to the Sunday school classes. When police told Dolores the truth about her husband, she collapsed. John List's trial began on March 29, 1990, in Elizabeth, New Jersey. His defense attorney, Elijah Miller Jr., attempted an insanity defense, arguing that List had suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and that his rigid religious beliefs had created a delusional framework in which murder was a rational act of mercy. Prosecutors dismantled this argument piece by piece. They pointed to the letters to the school, the cancelled deliveries, the thermostat, the cut photographs, the months of planning. This was not a man in the grip of delusion. This was a man who had meticulously orchestrated 5 murders and an escape, and had executed both with the cold precision of a man balancing a ledger. The most devastating moment came when prosecutor Eleanor Clark read aloud from List's letter to his pastor. His own words, his calm, methodical justification for killing his wife, his mother, and his 3 children. He showed no emotion as it was read. He showed no emotion during the entire trial. On April 12, 1990, the jury found John List guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms in prison. He would never be eligible for parole. John List died in prison on March 25, 2008, at the age of 82. He died in a hospital ward at a correctional facility in Trenton, New Jersey, just 40 miles from the mansion where he had murdered his family 37 years earlier. He never expressed genuine remorse. In his final interviews, he maintained that he had acted out of love, that he had sent his family to heaven, that he was, in his own mind, a good father. The ballroom at Breeze Knoll is gone now. The mansion burned to the ground long ago. A new house sits on the lot. The neighbors don't talk about what happened there, but the story endures. Not because of its violence. There have been worse crimes, more victims, more blood. It endures because of the silence of it, the neatness, the way a man could lay his children out in a row, kneel beside them, pray over their bodies, and then walk out the door and build a brand new life as if they had never existed. It endures because John List forces us to confront a terrifying question. How well do you really know the quiet man sitting next to you in church? If this story got under your skin, hit subscribe. We cover cases like this every week, the ones that make you lock your doors and rethink everything you thought you knew about the people around you. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the most disturbing part of this case to you? I'll see you in the next one.